The weekend for the Memphis Grizzlies started out pretty rough in San Antonio. It looked like the season for the Memphis Grizzlies might be over, as it has just basically begun. And yet a second half comeback helped spur the Grizzlies past the San Antonio Spurs in a much needed road win. And then on the second night of a back-to-back, with so much of the roster out for a variety of reasons, a gritty performance against the Boston Celtics. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Lock in with me.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day. I am your host for this episode of the podcast, Joe Mullinax, on this marvelous Thanksgiving Monday edition of the show. Hopefully your turkeys are in a nice salt water or some sort of delicious brine, getting nice and ready for being smoked or fried this coming Thursday. If you're still oven roasting your turkey, just know that it's 2023 and there are better options out there. I'm here for you if you want further advice on how to prepare that bird for a delicious feast that hopefully you're having if you partake in the Thanksgiving festivities here in a few days. But before we get to that, we've got plenty to dive into, to gobble up on this edition, this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Again, I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, Memphis Grizzlies columnist for that website. Make sure you're following me on X if you don't already do so, at Joe Mullinax. My co-host and partner, DeMichael Cole, not on this episode of the show, as has become custom when he has a home game there in Memphis, Tennessee, to break down and cover for the Commercial Appeal, since he is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. He's getting that work done, and then he'll come back to us for the Tuesday episode of the show. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Much, much, much appreciated. However you take in the show, check us out on YouTube, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Shout out to our everydayers, folks that check out each and every episode of the show as it becomes available. We appreciate you, whether you are with us each and every time a show drops or whether this is your first time checking out Locked On Grizzlies. We hope that you stick around, stay a while, and hit that subscribe button and make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. We're going to start with the most recent events, right? Because the San Antonio Spurs game could probably have its own episode of Locked On Grizzlies, but we got a action-packed show for you on this Monday. By the end of the show, you're going to believe me when I say Desmond Bane is one of, if not the best shooting guard in the National Basketball Association. I will make my case for that later on in the program. We're also going to talk about that dramatic turn of events that occurred there in San Antonio, 19-point storming of the gates against the Spurs. I'm going to argue that the Grizzlies basically saved their season, because I think that the energy that came from that tremendous comeback against the Spurs fed into the Boston Celtics game that the Grizzlies lost on Sunday night. And I do think that's important to point out, right? Like, the Memphis Grizzlies lost the basketball game, and this is professional sports. This isn't high school. This isn't college. You're not going to go out there and say, hey, they got a moral victory, right? You could argue those don't exist even at the peewee, middle school, high school, college level. Obviously, the higher up you go, the less likely it is that it exists. So it's extremely unlikely, if not impossible, for a moral victory to be a thing when millions upon millions of dollars are involved. However, considering who started the Memphis Grizzlies Boston Celtics game for the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm talking John Konchar. I'm talking Santi Aldama at the 3, like so many of you crazy, wild people have been asking for a long time. It worked in this game. It worked in this one. I'm not sure it's a long-term fix, but the Celtics were not able to make Memphis pay for having a Santi Aldama, Jaren Jackson Jr., Bismack Biyombo front court. Maybe one of the reasons for that is the fact that you had Biyombo and Jaren on the floor. Anything that got by Santi on the perimeter, you had not one but two pretty capable rim protectors backing him up. So maybe Memphis has stumbled into something there, and that's something we can talk to DeMichael about maybe on our Tuesday edition of the show when he's back with us. But I really want to shout out Santi Aldama, not just because of his ability to not get abused at the small forward position, not only because of his remarkable performance, career best 28 points scored, because to be honest with you, it wasn't the most efficient outing scoring the basketball for Santi Aldama. And he missed an open three at the end that would have put the Grizzlies in the lead. It was a pretty chaotic conclusion to the Memphis Grizzlies Boston Celtics game on Sunday night. If you didn't see it, I highly recommend you check it out. The Grizzlies got a wide open look. Santi Aldama, who had been a major piece of pacing this furious performance for Memphis. It was a close game throughout, right? Memphis was up by one at the end of the first quarter. Boston took a 3-point lead into the half, and then it was in and out the entire second half of basketball. And Aldama is a major reason why. But I don't want the main thing for you to take away from this basketball game to be that Santi Aldama was a dominant scorer. Because in my opinion, he wasn't. All right, he just wasn't. He was 11 of 27. That's a below average shooting performance. From three, he shot more threes than Desmond Bane and made one less. We'll talk about Des later on in the show, like I said. So 6 for 15 from beyond the arc. Not great, not bad. A good shooting night. Good. Where Aldama's impact was really felt was in his rebounding at 12 boards. It was in his assists at 6 assists. Santi Aldama was second on the Memphis Grizzlies in this contest with 6 assists. That is huge. It's huge because it shows the levels and variations to his game that we saw flashes of in FIBA when he was the best player in several contests for Team Spain in the FIBA tournament over the summer. Santi was that dude in this game, an NBA game against arguably, I don't know who would argue against it, the best team in the NBA right now in the Boston Celtics. Now, is it fair to say the Celtics probably overlooked Memphis a little bit? Yeah, that's fair to say. But I think that's canceled out by the fact that the Memphis Grizzlies were down a considerable amount of players. The fact that the Memphis Grizzlies did not have a night off to prepare like the Celtics did, because the Grizzlies were busy furiously getting into a comeback situation against the San Antonio Spurs just 24 hours prior. So for me, that's a wash. Do I think the Celtics overlooked the Grizzlies? Yeah, I do. Do I think Memphis was tired from the second night of a back-to-back game and put on a heck of a performance? Yeah, I do. I do. And I think Santi Aldama deserves a heck of a lot of credit for his showing. I think Zaire Williams had a better game. Again, 6 points on 11 shots. That's not particularly good. But what kept Memphis in this game is the contributions from folks like Zaire on the glass. 7 rebounds. The Memphis Grizzlies only got out-rebounded by the Boston Celtics by 3 boards. And that's against a team that has Kristaps Porzingis on it. 7'3" Kristaps Porzingis, who has killed the Grizzlies in the past, and in fairness, was a pretty major force in this one too. 6 blocks for Porzingis, including on a potential game winner, or game tire, I should say, from Zaire Williams after the Santi Aldama missed 3 that would have given the Grizzlies the lead. So Porzingis had a massive game. I'm not trying to make it sound like he didn't. You could say he was the best player for Boston in this one. But it's the contributions from Zaire Williams, winning type contributions. Jacob Gilyard, not starting, but still getting 5 assists, 2 steals in just 15 minutes of play, winning basketball plays. Winning basketball plays. Because the offense is not always going to be there, right? The Grizzlies almost won this game, had a chance to win, shooting about 39% from the field. 39%. How do you do that? You defend. You create shot opportunities. You rebound. Memphis did those things against one of the best teams, if not the best team and the entire National Basketball Association. They've only won 3 games. It's not like everything is fixed. We are now 13 games into a season, and the Memphis Grizzlies continue to be at the bottom of the Western Conference standings. But if you don't feel proud of the way that team competed in extremely difficult circumstances, no, it's not a moral victory. It's the National Basketball Association. But is it a heck of a lot different than if they had lost by 30? Is it a heck of a lot different than the hopelessness that at times you feel watching this team play, like you did in the first half of the San Antonio Spurs game, which we're going to talk more about here momentarily? Yeah, I'll take this over the alternative. And it's possible that Spurs game was a turning point defensively, a turning point in terms of those winning plays. We're going to talk about that and more coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. I am a huge fan of Prize Picks, and with basketball season here, it is really cool that you can combine projections across sports like football and basketball from the Specials League with Prize Picks. A league created specifically for combo projections includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Like you could do Desmond Bane with his 3-pointers made, and you could do someone like, I don't know, Justin Jefferson once he returns for the Vikings. You could do a 10.5 combo with 3-pointers made and receptions. That'd be a lot of fun to be able to connect sports that way. And they offer a reboot policy at Prize Picks. Your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for a football or basketball game, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half, doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Prize Picks is fun and a real unique daily fantasy sports opportunity. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, the Celtics game was cool, but the Grizzlies actually won the Spurs one. Let's talk about that when we come back. Stay with me. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode of the show. My co-host Michael Cole, not with me. He's cleaning up and finishing up work, covering the Grizzlies game against the Boston Celtics that we just got done talking about. My partner, Michael Cole, is the Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X if you don't already do so, at DeMichaelC. Follow me at Joe Mullinax. Make sure you're liking, commenting, all those fun things, subscribing, perhaps most importantly, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, to Locked On Grizzlies. So we started with the Celtics game, and Memphis loses that game. We gave flowers to Santi Aldama. We're going to talk more about Desmond Bane here in a bit. I don't want you to think, if you've been following the work that I do at Bluff City Media back when I was at Grizzly Bear Blues, here on Locked On Grizzlies, you know I'm not going to forget my boy Desmond Bane. Stick around, because it's going to get wild towards the end of the show. All right. But wanted to make sure Santi, a great performance, even though he missed the game-winning 3. Memphis isn't in a position to make that 3 if it isn't for Santi Aldama throughout that game. The same can be said of Jaren Jackson Jr. when it comes to the way that the San Antonio Spurs game played out the night before. The Grizzlies and the Spurs have similar records, right? 3-10-ish. The Spurs have actually won a game at home, whereas Memphis is still winless at FedEx Forum, which, considering their home record these last couple of years, that's one of the more wild pieces of this whole process, is how Memphis has lost that home court advantage. At least it seems that way for now. But they go on the road to San Antonio. The Spurs are a team that obviously has Victor Wenbanyama, who is a blast to watch. Jaren Jackson Jr. got a block on the 7'5" Wenbanyama, and I'm still not quite sure how he did it because of just how long and lean and the length of Wenbanyama really is a sight to behold. I can only imagine what it's like in person, just seeing it on television. He's so much taller and longer than everybody else on the floor. But Jaren Jackson Jr. had a game, I would say, similar, at least in the first half, to Santi Aldama in terms of the lack of efficiency. And his shooting performance was still not great. 7 for 20 from the field against the Spurs. It's not like he was dominant in that particular way. And Memphis looked completely awful in that first half in San Antonio. The Grizzlies were down 17 points at halftime. 17 points to the, at the time, 3-9 San Antonio Spurs. That's pretty embarrassing, right? Like, that was kind of a line in the sand moment for this season. You could see them come out of that locker room one of two ways. Do they lie down, feel sorry for themselves, just kind of take it, or do they fight back? And to the credit of Taylor Jenkins, the head coach of the Grizzlies, but more so the players that were on the floor, Jaren Jackson Jr. in particular, they did not lie down. Jaren dominated. He took over. The Spurs could not defend him without fouling. Jaren was 11 for 12 from the free throw line. No other player in the game had more than 8 free throws. So Jaren was aggressive, attacked to the rim, and he scored the ball pretty well in that second half. And the Grizzlies defense, again, connecting it back to the Celtics game we just watched. Boston struggled at times. It was one of the better performances defensively for Memphis, and that started in the Spurs game. Because in the second half of the San Antonio Spurs Memphis Grizzlies game, San Antonio only scored 40 points. 40 points. The Spurs had scored 35 points in the first quarter alone against the Grizzlies on Saturday night. So the first half was atrocious, and it looked like the Grizzlies were ready to call it a season, a week or almost a week before Thanksgiving. Plenty of basketball to be played, guys. And it seems like they snapped out of it, or maybe, playing a team like the Spurs that doesn't necessarily want to be in the play-in mix, not necessarily built to win. They don't have a true point guard on the floor right now, right? There's all sorts of different things that San Antonio is doing that maybe doesn't make or won't make a bunch of sense as the season goes on. But Memphis, you take the opportunities that are in front of you. Nobody's going to cry for the Memphis Grizzlies when it comes to the injury issues they've faced or any other frustration that maybe has come their way from the Ja Morant suspension, all those sorts of things. But at the same time, when opportunity arises to play against the San Antonio Spurs team more interested in development than winning, when that comes across your board, you have to take advantage of it. And the Memphis Grizzlies did just that in the second half against San Antonio. And maybe that helped propel them into the performance they had against Boston because they were more confident, especially defensively. And that is where Memphis, as DeMichael and I have talked about multiple times here on Locked On Grizzlies, if they're going to dig themselves out of this hole, right? Houston Rockets are coming up next. If they're going to find a way to win a game or two, get on a little bit of a run, they have to be able to have their defense be their calling card. And that hasn't really been the case. But the second half of the San Antonio Spurs game, things kicked in. The Spurs, they shot about, 38% from three. But at the same time, it was not lights out. It wasn't a career best night. It wasn't them setting franchise records, and the same thing happened to Boston. So the three-point defense gets a little bit better, especially in that second half against the Spurs. That translates into the Celtics game. You're not going to completely stop the Boston Celtics. The San Antonio Spurs are well coached. They're going to move the ball. They're going to get open looks. The key is to not overhelp, set your feet, be in a good position to defend the way that you have to defend in the NBA on the perimeter. The three-point shot is a weapon that everybody tries to utilize. Everybody practices it. If you just leave it open and you're overhelping, teams are going to kill you. For 6 quarters now, the second half of the San Antonio game and the Boston Celtics game against, again, in my opinion, the best team in the NBA, the Memphis Grizzlies defense looks like it may be back. And Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, is the catalyst for that. Bismack Biyombo had a strong performance against San Antonio. Aldama had 17 points on 15 shots, 10 rebounds for Santi, so he had a really good weekend all around. Zaire Williams played well. 4 of 8 from the field, 17 points for Zaire, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. So maybe things are starting to turn around. Maybe we're getting on the up and up here with these Grizzlies. They have a couple of days to get their legs back under them. But the San Antonio game, first half, second half, it was a tale of 2 different teams, tale of 2 different halves of basketball. Thankfully, the second half Grizzlies are the ones that pulled out the victory and kind of carried that momentum over to the Boston game. So Memphis finishes the weekend 1-1. big win on the road in San Antonio. And while it was a loss against the Celtics, doesn't feel like a win because it was a loss, but it was good to see them compete in that fashion, considering all the injuries and everything going on. Marcus Smart being out for the first game against the Celtics, his former team. Luke Kennard still not playing. Memphis is down a considerable chunk of their roster, not just their rotation, but their roster as a whole. So they deserve credit for competing. They deserve credit for picking up that win in San Antonio, especially with their second half performance. And then that energy hopefully will continue to feed into not just the Celtics game, but beyond into the remainder of this without Ja Morant stretch of basketball. I saved the best for last in terms of my dear love for Desmond Bane and how I just think the world of him right now, how he is playing, helping keep these Grizzlies afloat as best he can, right? 3-10, the ship's taken on water, but the team is still competing. Desmond Bane's the main reason for that. We're going to talk about that next and where Desmond Bane ranks among NBA shooting guards next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure that you are not just checking out the NBA, but also the NFL season over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, yes, right now, right this moment, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's right, $150 if your team wins. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel. There is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is extremely easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, the ever-popular same-game parlay, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Get it together. Go over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season. Continue to grind along with the NBA, of course, as well. But FanDuel is the place to do it, the official partner of the NFL. Desmond Bane is the best shooting guard in the National Basketball Association. Maybe second best. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with me, please. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, Grizzlies columnist over at Bluff City Media, flying solo on this marvelous Monday edition of the show. DeMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, will be back with me on the Tuesday episode, but he is finishing up coverage of Grizzlies Celtics for the Commercial Appeal. So as has become the custom after these home games, it is you and I going through what is happening with the Memphis Grizzlies. A successful weekend overall. Obviously, being 2-0 would be much better, but the way that they competed against the best team in the NBA and the Boston Celtics, the way that they roared back against the San Antonio Spurs, especially over the last 6 quarters of basketball, kind of feels like Memphis has figured it out. And the main reason for that is Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane is playing the best basketball of his career. Desmond Bane is undoubtedly an all-star in my mind. And I would make the argument that Desmond Bane is the best shooting guard in the National Basketball Association. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm sure I'll have fans in the comments on YouTube of other teams talking about how Devin Booker exists and Anthony Edwards is having one of the best seasons of his career. And you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in Oklahoma City and Donovan Booker over in Cleveland with the Cavs. How could you say Bane is the absolute best? Context matters. Desmond Bane is doing what he is doing, for example, against the Boston Celtics as the focal point of their defense, and the Boston Celtics have a very good defense. 11 of 27, much like Aldama, like we talked about earlier in the show, but 30 points instead of the 28 that Santi scored. 7 of 14, 50% from three. And Bane is doing this well, especially in the Boston game, being asked to be the primary creator of offense for the Memphis Grizzlies. DeMichael and I on this episode, on these on these Locked On Waves, have talked in the past about how I want exactly what happened against Boston. I want the ball in the hands of Desmond Bane. He is their best offensive weapon. Until John Morant returns, he's their best offensive player. It's like a quarterback in football. Get that guy's decision-making process in on every single possession that you possibly can. He already has a career high usage rate. He is doing great things. 8 assists to only 2 turnovers, over 37 minutes of play, 30 points, still had a solid defensive impact, 1 steal. He was only +1 on the game. Single game plus minus is not the most reliable statistic to measure, but he has been a steadying force, a presence. You can count on Desmond Bane. Jaren Jackson Jr. helped kind of pace that comeback against San Antonio, but Desmond Bane, 26 points in that contest. So 56 points across 2 games. He shot 50% from 3. So again, 7 from 14 against the Celtics, 3 of 6 against San Antonio. Bane's showing heightened development in terms of the diversity of his game. He had 5 rebounds against the Spurs. He got to the free throw line 7 times, made all 7 free throws. He didn't do that as much against the Celtics. He made his 3-pointers. I got to tell you, Anthony Edwards is phenomenal. And if you want to make an argument for him being better than Desmond Bane, I'm not going to argue against you. Devin Booker is obviously extremely talented, has been for a long time. SGA in Oklahoma City, Mitchell in Cleveland, they all have arguments. When you combine the reality of the Memphis Grizzlies situation, what they are dealing with, and how Desmond Bane is doing this with, again, can't stress enough, the starting lineup against the Boston Celtics was John Konchar, Mr. White Rice himself, who in 26 minutes of play took 3 shots, grabbed 5 rebounds. Zaire Williams got more rebounds than Konchar did. 3 assists. Zaire did better. -13 in his 26 minutes played. The next worst was, ironically, Zaire at -5. That's an 8-point difference. Mr. White Rice didn't get it done as well as he potentially could have against the Celtics. But it's John Konchar, Santi Aldama at the 3, Jaren Jackson Jr., Bismack Biyombo. So 3 bigs, White Rice, John Konchar, and Desmond Bane. And Bane puts a 30-piece on perhaps one of the best, if not the best, defenses against the best, if not one of the best, teams in the NBA. Bane is doing this not by himself, but he is doing it in a way that is different than anybody else. SGA has help, right? You can't say Chet Holmgren is great and Josh Giddey is great and then say that they're not good enough compared to Jaren Jackson Jr. and what's happening in Memphis. Obviously, Anthony Edwards has help. Karl Anthony Towns has had a great start to the season. Rudy Gobert doing some good things. The Timberwolves are playing well. Edwards is the main reason for that, but he has help. Of course, Cleveland has help. All of those teams are healthier than what the Memphis Grizzlies are currently doing. So if you want to make an argument for the names that I listed, I hear you. I understand. I'm not going to say you're wrong. Just know that I'm right. Where would the Memphis Grizzlies be without Desmond Bane? They would be in a much worse place than they currently are right now. And that's wild to say out loud, because obviously things are not going great in Memphis. This episode sounds really happy and cheerful. They're still 3-10. They're still at the bottom of the Western Conference. They're still a few games away from the play-in, much less the playoffs. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. But it is hard to move forward from the last 6 quarters of Memphis Grizzlies basketball and think that the team is going to be bad the rest of the season. It's difficult to do that. It defies logic. And one of the reasons for that, if not the main reason for that, is Desmond freaking Bane and what he is currently doing for the Memphis Grizzlies. So no disrespect to anybody else. Desmond Bane should be an all-star if this pace continues. Desmond Bane is, for my money, pound for pound, considering everything going on around him, the best shooting guard in the NBA. But again, lots of other dudes you can make arguments for. Maybe you want to do that in the comments. Go ahead and see fit to do so. You might notice I interact with you guys in the comments, even when you're not very nice to me, which, sometimes I deserve it. It's all good. I'm glad that you're listening, downloading, watching Locked On Grizzlies, even if you're not going to be all that nice to me. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the show. I want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. The next time we're together here on Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael will be back with me. I'll get his takeaways from the weekend. Hopefully we have some injury updates. We'll talk about some of those fun things, see how he's feeling after watching Grizzlies basketball over the last couple of games. I'm feeling better. I've been feeling better, but I feel better than I have in a long time, focusing on that second half against the Spurs and pretty much the entire Celtics game. Context matters, and they're competing. They're getting better. I think that a run is coming if they could just find a way to get healthy. If they can't get healthy, then the rest doesn't necessarily matter, right? If they can find some sliver of health, I think that'll make all the difference for the Memphis Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, however you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Free and available wherever you get those shows as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Proud members of the network. Make sure that you are following along and making us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption every single day. Be an everydayer. This is your first time checking us out. Hopefully you'll check us out again tomorrow, where it'll be the dynamic duo back at it for a Tuesday edition of the show. But until that time, it is I, Joe Mullinax, telling you to have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, all those fun things. Until next time, this is Locked On Grizzlies.